So Chris is a really, really wonderful, skilled botanist, and he's a musician too. I'll throw that in. Just embarrassing, maybe. But he's been involved with the Flora of Virginia, exploring it for over 3 decades. His explorations, he's documented 1,000 or over 1,000 rare plant populations and has co-discovered 20 new plant species previously undocumented from Virginia, 2 of which are new to science, which is great. Much of this work took place when he worked for the Virginia Natural Heritage Program that's in the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. And that's where he served as staff botanist from 1988 to 1996 and chief biologist from 97 till he retired in 2019. In 2000, he joined Marion, Lobstein, and Joslin, Gallatin to form the foundation of the Flora of Virginia Project. And he worked over the next 12 years to produce the Flora of Virginia, which I think most of us are aware of. It's wonderful. A 1,500-some page illustrated manual describing Virginia's vascular plants with details on taxonomy, morphology, ecology, biological status, and identification. Chris has co-authored the work with Alan Weakley and Johnny Townsend, 2 other extraordinary botanists. The volume was made available in the Flora of Virginia app that most of us have. If you don't, go get it. That is available on Android and iOS devices. The Flora app also enhances the original work with a graphic key that enables less experienced naturalists to identify things that they see. So tonight, we're really happy to have Chris speak to us on a project on his own property in Hanover County, Virginia. His efforts began in 1991, and he's going to talk about an oak savanna that he's been working on for a decade and how he's used fire and mechanical clearing. He didn't plant anything. He was just, working with what was there. How he battled invasive plants and was patient waiting for the native understory flora to develop. And his mantra is build it and they will come, or somebody else's, and he borrowed it. It's true, but it can take a while. So the title of his talk is Home is Where the Grassland Is. And take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Jill. Before I give my talk, I could hardly believe it when I looked at the previous screen that had all the people there. There was a person who's very special to me that I probably haven't talked to in 30 plus years, and that's Bob Solom. So I was in Hanover County in about 1980 and got my Newcomb's Wildflower Guide and found out that Bob and Joe were really into plants. And really, I owe a lot of my career and my lifelong interest in plants to Bob. So Bob, I know you're at least listening out there. I hope you are, because I did see your name. So I want to take an opportunity before I speak to say thank you for that time long ago when you nurtured me and got me very interested in the flora of Howard County. And I'll share one other story that Bob told me and was something that really inspired me, is that at that time, Bob had done a list of the plants of the county with first blooming date and sort of last blooming date. And so it was not easy to find new plants for the county, but I was always challenged to find one that was blooming a bit earlier or later than the dates in that list. And Bob told me that was intentional to entice me and others to be more interested in the plants of the county. So Bob, I know you're there somewhere. Thank you so much for helping me along and helping me get this very rewarding career that Jill just mentioned. So I'll move on to this talk. Home is where the grassland is. This is a shot of my house, and to the right of the house there is the savanna that we're going to talk about today. So this is 10 acres in western Hanover County, west of the fall line by about 30 miles west-northwest of Richmond, and that's sort of that empty space between Charlottesville and Richmond that you'll see if you drive I-64 between those two cities. In the mid-'80s, the land had been selectively cut leaving some oaks and other hardwoods, along with a few pines and cedars. So when I bought the land, it was basically a jumble of stump sprouts and saplings and brambles with scattered trees that they had left. And that's sort of the starting point when I moved there in 1991 and actually started this project in late 91. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the term grassland, and the way that I'm using it is really the way that a lot of people are using that term now, sort of as collectively. So in the 80s, and even before that, but definitely the 80s, 90s, 2000s, sort of everybody in the East that was interested in plants was coming to the realization that there were a whole lot of plants that were indicative of open habitats that were, you know, all around us in the East, but, you know, everybody thought the East was mostly forested. You know, most people thought that. And so slowly gaining strength was the idea that grasslands or open areas of vegetation were sort of throughout the East Coast, the Eastern states rather. And so this was really brought together in a book that by Reed Noss, Timber Press, 2013, called Forgotten Grasslands of the South. And it really sort of put a lot of this information together in one place and helped really launch a lot of serious conservation work, grasslands. So the way that Reed defines grasslands, the way a lot of people do now, at least in our part of the world, and I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just paraphrase. It's any natural community ecosystem in which the herbaceous layer is dominated by grasses or other graminoid, which is grass-like plants, and also forbs, which are, of course, the herbaceous understory, basically the wildflowers. And this definition, it doesn't exclude trees so long as the tree canopy is not so dense as to shade out that herbaceous layer. So that's how Reed defined grasslands. And that's how a lot of people talk about grasslands now. So that could be a salt marsh, it could be a beaver meadow, it could be a barren, it could be a savanna, it could be an open field, could be a meadow. So a lot of different things, as long as the trees don't entirely shade out the herbaceous layer. So talking about major drivers, major things that cause grassland, well, one is drought. So the idea too wet to be a desert and too dry to be a forest. And there are areas like that, vast areas that are sort of the grasslands of the world. Here's a very rough map, not a very literal, but sort of a figurative map of those dark green areas being where the grasslands are, those big biome type scale grasslands. But that's not the only place they occur. On the right, here's the shot by Gary Fleming in Virginia Beach, showing a totally wonderful grassland that occurs in the dunes behind the, that's actually the Chesapeake Bay there, so behind the bay. And that results because it's too dry to be a forest. Sand substrates are very permeable, the water goes right through, and so they're very droughty, and that drought allows grasslands to occur because the grasses in that picture, such as the beach panic grass, the seaside blue stem, and the sea oats, they're all adapted to those dry conditions. And so grasslands are throughout Virginia. They used to be throughout much of Maryland as well. And we talk a lot about that. But anyway, one of the drivers is drought. Second one is fire. Fire is now known to be very, very important in terms of biodiversity conservation, because fire adapted communities were throughout much of the world, and certainly throughout North America. I put that picture of Smokey up there, who for the last 80, 100 years has been telling us not to let fires get loose. The timber industry and the U.S. Forest Service had a lot to do with that campaign, and they were very successful. But as a result, we've lost fire throughout most of Virginia. But if you look at on the left there, this U.S. map, there are a lot of modeling out there right now about what the fire frequency was believed to be prior to European settlement. And this map shows that fire was very frequent in Virginia, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. In the lower right is a picture of a controlled burn that people are doing and a lot of conservation organizations, including TNC and the Department of Conservation, they're doing similar things where they're using controlled fire to maintain their natural communities. So drought and fire were very important if you want to have a grassland. A third driver is mechanical. Pre-settlement, how would that occur? Mostly through animals, such as the beaver on the lower left, who would dam streams and make meadows and chop down trees directly. And then upper left, bison, lower right, elk. They were in Virginia, Piedmont until the into the 1800s. And then upper right, many of you from Maryland will recognize Great Falls. There you the mechanical disturbances, flooding, which overtops those rocky areas and in high water and wipes out a lot of the woody vegetation, but some of the tougher species of the grasses and other forbs can maintain in those, and they make nice riverside prairies. You know, flooding also occurs in salt marshes where the tides actually do all the work to keep those free of trees, and you get vast meadows of species like salt marsh cordgrass or salt meadow hay. So mechanical disturbance in the terms of water and animals is certainly a very big driver. And so you overlay that with sort of a fourth driver, if you will, and that's anthropogenic openings in the forest. And of course, this is a shot of the Native Americans raising corn on the left and beans on the right in an agricultural setting. So there were vast populations of humans prior to European settlement, and they would have opened the landscape as well. So you have all these disturbance factors and other factors, edaphic factors, soil factors that cause grasslands to occur. So let's bring it back to home. Home is where the grassland is. So what factors might have played a role in Hanover County and in the Virginia Piedmont and well as well into the Piedmont of Maryland? Well, drought, probably not. There was a following the ice age and the peak of the last ice age, we had a warming period and dry period called the hypsothermal, about 4,000 to 8,000 years before present. And that was drier than today, but probably not dry enough to inhibit tree growth, at least not in Hanover County. Mechanical probably did play a role because there was the herbivory by bison, elk, and deer. I'm in an upland, so beaver wouldn't have played much of a role. And fire was probably very important. I talked about fire frequency before, and the estimates for the area that we're in, roughly every 4 to 8 years, it's believed fire would have, swept through a random acre in Virginia, swept through the woodlands of Virginia. And if you look at this map, a little closer, there's Virginia. The orange there, that's an X of where my property is approximately located. And that orange there is about 4 to 8 year frequency. The darker orange down below in North Carolina is 2 to 4 year frequency. So quite frequently, fires would have swept through the Piedmont. So I mentioned the project started in really late 91, early 92. And so after this cut that I mentioned, and they had left just this tangle, this is not actually a picture. I wish I had taken a picture way back then of the property, but this is my memory of what it looked like. And so I began lopping, literally mechanically removing every woody stem except for the larger trees that were left in the 8 to 14 inch dBH range. And I have a list of the species there on the left you can look through. I would say more oaks than anything else. Lesser amounts of the other trees. Beech is fairly prominent. Tulip tree, red maple as well. So that's a list of the trees on the left that were there. But basically, it took me about 3 years of lopping on weekends and in spare moments to get rid of that view you see there. And then I supplemented the lopping with burning whenever I could do so safely and wherever I had a sufficient fuel load. So as a result of those 2 acres that I've opened up, they've all been burned at least 5 times, and some of them have been burned 20 times during the last 30, 3 years. And so you do the frequency area. Obviously, I'm at a much higher frequency right now than probably occurred pre-settlement, but it's really necessary to really get things cranking along, I thought. And so if you do the areas that have burned 5 times out of 33 years, that's a little more than once every 6 years. And then some of it I've done less than once every 2 years. I am slowing down the burning now. And in the early years, particularly, I had a very sparse herb layer. So I opened up the canopy and then I didn't have a lot of things coming up right at the beginning. So I would use the leaves, the dry leaves, to carry fire. And thus, as a result, all the burns were really conducted between December and early April. So this is a video. This is a burn in 2021. It's a short video. I am very, 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 very cautious. I burned with people who knew what they were doing at the beginning, and since then I've learned enough that I burn on my own, but I only do it when it's relatively humid and when the wind is very low. So this will give you an idea of the intensity that most of the burns I've conducted are given at. All right. So one thing I would like you to notice in this picture is this tree right to the left. This is a post oak, one of 2 or 3 that are in the 2-acre savanna. So that's a post oak there, and I'm gonna refer to that in a couple other slides. But this was done March 8th, and this is sort of a view from the house of what that looked like on March 12th. And right over here, hopefully you can see my cursor, is that one stem, that one post oak trunk there. So that's what it looks like right after burns. And this is a photo from the same shot a month and a half later, that shows you that the understory is doing just fine. Those burns really have very, very, very little effect on the herbaceous layer in terms of their survival. Almost all the herbs in there, and of course the woody plants, are perennials, and most of their food, most of their is stored below ground, most of their biomass. So they can easily recover, herbs more easily than woody plants in general when a fire occurs. So it looks great. And that's a nice general look of what the savanna looks like. The result is really a beautiful physiognomy. Physiognomy is the structure of the vegetation. This is sort of spring, right after the burn. In fact, it's that same time of year, and that trunk right there, that very dark trunk, is that same post oak looking towards the house. So that gives you an idea of what it looks like. Now, this is after 25, 30 years. So the woodies are pretty much gone or under control, and you have this nice, very diverse, and we'll get into that, flush of native plants. If that were enough, that would be great, but it's not. There's a lot more work that I have to do on this to best, I think, simulate what might have happened pre-settlement to get an idea of what the vegetation might do. So the first thing is that I have mowed parts of the savanna, nothing more than 5 times, but with the idea that that might somewhat simulate the grazing, the deer, the elk, and the bison that were there previously. So I have done a bit of mowing. Most of the opening is a result of fire. I have pulled non-natives, and I'm going to get into that more. That is probably the most labor-intensive part of this whole endeavor, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I use glyphosate very, very sparingly, but I've used it on Lespedeza cuneata in particular because it's very difficult to pull that and get the rhizome. So I have used glyphosate on that. And I have on the edges of the savanna done some girdling, which is great in that it makes great wildlife habitat. You make a living tree a dead tree, and then you really get to see what the woodpeckers and the bark beetles and everything else can feed on. So it's been a great way to open up and get sun into that herbaceous area. I will say it's a bit of a pain in one way, and it's a blessing in another. It's a blessing because the wildlife. I last year just had my second brood of pileated woodpeckers that have made their home in one of the trees I girdled. But it's a curse sometimes when you're doing burns because, of course, you don't want to set a 35-foot tall tree on fire and have it fall outside of your burn line and burn up the surrounding woods. So it does create some challenges in burning, but it is a great way to open up the canopy in a very sort of wildlife friendly way. So all this management has been going on now for 33-ish years. But the result's spectacular. So this is a late summer shot, looking away from the house towards that area that burned. That tall yellow flower there, that's Silphium trifoliatum, now Silphium asteriscus. And on the left over there, that tall plant to the left, that's Vernonia glauca. And both these have just really, really thrived in this community. There's a lot more in there. We're going to talk about that, but I'm really happy with the results in terms of the overall look of the native grassland there. Now, the plants don't all act the same. In other words, some of them come, some of them go, and I'll talk about a few of those. Smooth sumac, which is a problem in where they burn prairies in the West, did come in relatively heavily. The population exploded. It's almost entirely gone from the savanna now. So I don't know exactly why that is that I've been able to get rid of the roost glaber. I know other people have a trouble with it really remaining as it's native, but as a heavy cover that outcompetes some of the other species. Sometimes things barely change. So this is curly heads, Clematis ochroluca, a relatively uncommon plant in Virginia, and I think an extirpated or super rare plant in Maryland. And so when I got the property, I was so thrilled to find some Clematis ochroluca, the curly heads. I found like 3 or 4 plants about 80 yards from the house and another 3 or 4 about 120 yards from that in the savanna, both of them. And I've watched them for the last 25 years, and they haven't increased or decreased in population size. They haven't moved but a foot or two. So some of these plants, they barely move. They barely change their status. Others are steadily increasing. I mentioned previously the Vernonia glauca, which is the upland ironweed. This is another one, the hairy Angelica venenosa. This thing is coming on hard. Just had a few plants 20 years ago. There's hundreds and hundreds of this. It's really thriving in this community. Sometimes things will hide and then show up again. This is Seneca polygama, the bitter milkwort, which I found in the 90s, didn't see from 2000 until 2000, like I think it was 2019. So it was gone for 19 plus years, not far from the house, and I just couldn't find it. And then it popped up again. It's also a very uncommon plant in the Piedmont of Virginia. And then occasionally, and this is my favorite, things will show up after 30 years. So one of the things I did, I'm going to talk about is I did when I retired in 2019 and 2020, I did a very, very laborious, hard look to record every species of vascular plant in the 2-acre savanna. And these are 3 species that showed up. Of course, it was no thrill to find Asiatic hawksbeard, Youngia japonica, because that's a non-native, and I quickly got rid of that, or at least tried to, except for this summer I found a few hangers on, so I've gotten those out of there. And then I found Convolvulus spathamius, low bindweed, which is a fairly uncommon plant in Virginia. And then this lovely Carolina spiny pod, Matelia caroliniensis. And, you know, I had been over that 20-acre or 2 acres quite a bit. And I say show up after all these years. Sometimes I think they show up because they have come in since I started this project, like the Asiatic hawksbeard. I suspect that Carolina spiny pod had been hanging out somewhere in the savanna near where I found it for a long time. And it just took that project where I went sort of square inch by square inch over the whole 2 acres to find that species in the savanna. Anyway, my whole point being plants act a little differently than one another. I want to draw your attention. So this is looking towards the house, but I want to draw your attention in the upper left hand there where that black oval is. You'll see a very light patch out there. So that's, I have on my property just a little bit of a high tension, high tension power line, one of those large distribution rights of way. And it's dominated by wonderful plants, including Indian grass and little blue stem, and to a lesser extent, broom sedge. And I thought when I did all this burning that what was going to happen was all that was going to move into the savanna. But that's not what happened at all. In fact, there's probably not more than 20 or 30 clumps of sorghastrum, that's Indian grass, 10 clumps of little blue, and a few patches of broom sedge. But all these other grasses are graminoids, because one of them is actually a sedge, the scleria, but all these other grass and grass-like plants moved in and are very common in the savanna. And nothing really has come to dominate large areas quite yet. It's sort of a real jump on a real mix of species, which is really fun. So you're constantly sort of surprised by something new. So this is give you some aerial context. This the savanna that I've created is long and thin. It sort of follows the uplands of the property. You can see in the lower part of this picture, that's the transmission line that I mentioned. My house is in this sort of nicked area here. That's where the house is. So this is the extent of the savanna. Covers 2 of the 10-acre property. And then I have a quote on here: to plant or not to plant, that is the question. So here's the thing. I think if you're lucky enough, like I've been, to live in one place for 30 years and you think you're going to live there a long time and you have the time and you have a few natives or maybe a little patch of woodland, I would recommend not planting, opening up the canopy, controlling the invasives, and seeing what happens. It's a wonderful way to learn. And that's been the biggest thrill I've had, is just to see how the vegetation structure changes and how the plant community, the herbaceous community changes, how things move around, how things act, how the plants act when they're presented with this beautiful open habitat and they don't have to compete with the non-natives. So I was very lucky that I had a plot of land to do this in, and I did it. I've done it now for 30 plus years, and that really has taught me a lot. I've learned a lot. I enjoy the savanna very much because I did not choose to plant anything. I also enjoy the fact that most, if not all, the natives here presumably come from this plot of land or very close by. So it gives me some joy that the genetic heritage, local genetic heritage, is represented in the savanna that has been created. All right, so this is my big lesson. Never put off till tomorrow what you can do today. And this has to do with invasives. So until I retired in 2019, I was busy working. I did the Flora of Virginia. I was raising a family. And so I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to really get into monitoring the savanna and controlling invasives. And I remember walking by things and saying, I need to deal with that. And then getting distracted with life and not doing it. And so these wonderful species here probably all fit in that category of things I saw and probably should have done something about and didn't until 2020 when I did this big savanna project. And so I spent a lot of time, a lot of Zen-like time controlling invasives on the property. And these are the main ones that have taken up the most time, literally pulling them up. The Lespedeza cuneata, as I mentioned, I have to do a little bit of work with, glyphosate, but it's quite a list of problematic plants there that I've dealt with. And the lesson I really have to say, never put off till tomorrow what you can do today, is you see these things, pull them, because they're a bitch once they get in. I will say one of the challenges too, and that's a challenge everywhere now, is that there are so many non-natives that are good at moving around that even if you do control them, it's a constant battle. You can't just leave something alone for 5 years and expect all those invasives won't have come back to one extent or another. So when I did that 2020 flora over the two acres, found 301 vascular plant species, 256 natives, 45 non-natives. Since then, I found 6 more natives, believe it or not, for a total of 262 natives in that property. I did a blog post. So some of you may know the Southeastern Grasslands Institute. They are huge proponents of grassland conservation in the Eastern US. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't looked them up and seen what they're all about, you should. It's a fascinating group of people. It's run by a guy named Dwayne Estes out of Austin P University. And I did a blog post for them that you can find if you go to their site, that basically is this talk with some differences. But one of the things in that blog post is there's a link to the plant list. So when I did that 2020 flora, I actually published the plant list in that blog post with the blog post. So I'd encourage you to look it up if you're curious as to what the plants are. All 301 are listed in there. So where did those plants come from? 256 plants, that's a lot. Well, many of them were relictual. I mentioned earlier the Clematis ochroleuca, the curly heads. Here's a picture of one of the curly heads in the savanna. And if those plants, like I said, have been there since I've gotten there, and they were undoubtedly there before. They probably survived that logging just fine. And then I opened up the canopy, and so they've been able to come back. But there are, lots of, there's what's known as a seed bank and a bud bank, or a lot of perenniating material in the soil that once you open up a canopy, the grass, the heliophytic species, the species that like the sun, will come out and express themselves. And so that's the Clematis ochroleuca. By the way, that's Salvia lyrata, a very nice native to the right. That's a Galium right below it. I see a holly, I see a uvularia. So those are some of the plants that were in the savanna once I opened it up that were really showed themselves. This is my favorite term to introduce in this talk, epizookery, which is the movement of seeds by getting on the fur of animals. So these are my 2 golden retrievers, and this is after a walk in the savanna. And just for fun, I counted the desmodium seeds on their legs, just 1 leg for each animal. That's my boy dog's leg. There's my girl dog in the back of her leg. My boy dog had 97 seeds on 1 leg. My girl dog, a little around 30. That's just 1 leg. That doesn't count the other 3 legs and the torsos, and the fact that that's just 1 walk. So things really get around well by attaching themselves to animals. And that's epizookery. And I will mention that a lot of the non-natives are going to get around the same way, and that's why you have to be on the lookout. Some of the other species, and there's desmodium. There's about 11 desmodium, some number like that, of species in the savanna. A lot of them I suspect showed up after I opened up the canopy and the deer come through and drop those seeds, or another dog or a fox or what have you comes through and drops those seeds. Galiums, there's a lot of galiums. I know these because I pull them out of my dog's fur every night. Galiums are really good at this. Agramonia is very good at this. And Biden's bidentoides in particular is very, very good at this. So the tick trefoils, the galiums, of course, are the, oh gosh, I can't believe wild matter. I'm going to bed straws. And yep. And then the third one I mentioned, Biden's bidentoides, is Spanish needles. And I think I mentioned one more, Agrimonia is just Agrimonia. Anyway, that's another group of plants that has certainly showed up in great abundance in the opened forest, that the savanna. And then frugivory does it, of course. Both natives like blackberry and capbriar and greenbrier, and then non-natives. When I did this 2020 work, I found this autumn olive right in the middle of the savanna. I'd never seen it there before, and that's the seed, which is favored by birds, some birds as well. So those things really get around very well, and there's a lot of that, particularly the blackberry in the savanna. Blackberry and raspberry are both there. And then wind is also another way natives get around. This is pilewort, also known as burnweed, which is Erectites hyracifolia. And there was a clear cut, actually, you could see in a couple of the earlier photos of the savanna. And that clear cut, right after the clear cut, there were hundreds of thousands of this plant in the 60-acre clear cut. And that fall, when the wind blew in our direction, there were millions of seeds flying by. You looked up in the air column, and for 1,000 feet straight up, it'd be nothing but streaming burnweed seeds. And of course, that's a way that plants introduce themselves. So all these contribute to that number of 256 that were found in the savanna. Well, I said 256, and of course now it's 262. I'm sorry, I forgot that we added those 6 since I did that 2020 study. Also, I want to point out that I don't think this would necessarily happen on any 2 acres. There's a couple of other contributing factors. One is that my soils are quite basic. I remember an amphibolite derived metamorphosed rock, so my pHs are running in the upper 5s and even into the 6s. So that's a very, very fertile soil that you get a pretty good diversity of things like legumes. This colorful plant in here, which appears on my screen to be bluish purple, but is actually quite pink, is Liatris squarosa. And that plant actually requires the pH get up into the 5+ range. It doesn't like very acid soils. And the Vernonia glauca that's shown all around it, this tall plant, the upland ironweed, also prefers to some extent the more basic soils. So that's one reason I think this area is good. Also, there are natives that are definitely adapted towards disturbance. As all you know, probably this wing stem would be this verbicina. So because of my driveway and that power line right away, and of course the road next to my driveway that my driveway spills into, all those disturbances, and my backyard and my side yard, and whatever happens around my house, you get these little disturbed areas, and they will collect some natives that are definitely adapted to disturbance. And then also we have so many natives, or so many species, because I have forests surrounding this savanna, and the forest species such as this tipulary discolor cranesfly orchid and others like Liparis lilifolia, the lily leaf twayblade, they do pretty well in the savanna, except in the most open parts. So I was actually collecting some species in the savanna that are just as well adapted to the deep forest. So all those things contribute to this large number of native species. Could there be more than that on 2 acres? I suspect if I had any hydrology at all, like a little seep or a little pool, I would add another 5 to 20 species easily. So that's the kind of diversity you're dealing with in this habitat. It's really incredible to experience. And here's even more mind-blowing. This is a list on the left of plants that are adapted to the savanna that are within 300 yards of the savanna, but I've never seen them in the savanna. So it's pretty amazing to me that these plants haven't found their way in yet, but they have not. And then within 5 miles, the county road's a little farther afield. There's another whole passel of plants there that I don't have yet in the savanna. Now, some of them may show up, and in fact, I'm going to talk about that in just a sec, but they haven't made them their way there yet. I don't know if they will. We'll see. These are the new arrivals I mentioned. One of them is a non-native, the Cyperus brevifolioides, but the other 6 are natives. And some of them you could understand I might have missed them because they're sort of the 2 Carex, Festicacea and Leavenworthii are somewhat indescript or hard to see. But the others are big plants. Oops, I double counted Eupatorium perfoliatum, ignore that. But that was probably the biggest surprise of all the new plants was the bone set, the Eupatorium perfoliatum, that I guarantee you all of us think of as a wetland plant, but it germinated in the savanna at some point, and it's been flowering for a couple years. It looks fantastic, and it's just as happy being in a total upland as it is down in the wetlands. So go figure. That shows you that we're always learning new things about plants. And then the other one I'll mention is Coreopsis tripteris, because that's a relatively uncommon plant, and it grows within, a very short distance from the house. I haven't introduced it. Nobody I know around me has planted Coreopsis tripteris, but it showed up this year and flowered. It was amazing because it's such a beautiful plant. As many of you know, that's the tall Coreopsis is just gorgeous. So new arrivals and lots of surprises, which makes things a lot of fun. If you're interested in more stories like this, I have to recommend this paper by Van der Yacht et al., which a 2020 paper called Litter to Glitter, Promoting Herbaceous Ground Cover and Diversity in Mid-Southern USA Oak Forest Using Canopy Disturbance and Fire. And the results they got through their work in a very short time, like a 5-year time period, were incredible. So you might want to read that if you're into this stuff and like to see the resiliency of our grassland flora. Well, it's not all about the plants. I'll talk about the animals just a little bit. This is a fun shot I did when I was doing that 2020 work. This is 3 eastern-tailed blues still sleeping at 8:30 a.m. As some of you may know, if you're into butterflies, they're generalists nectar-wise, but their larvae key into, as a host plant, legumes. And of course, because legumes love basic soil and love burning, there's 30 native species of legumes in the savanna. About 26 natives, a couple non-natives. And these butterfly love those type of situations. This is a moth. I did a really, really exhaustive study of the macro moths of the property in the 90s. This may not really be attributable to the habitat I made, but it's so cool I had to share it. This is Acronicta alborufa, which is the barren stagger moth, a moth whose larva is totally dependent on post oak, and it's a globally rare moth that's never been collected in Virginia except on the property. And of course, there are a couple post oaks, as I mentioned earlier, in the savanna. This is a bobcat I caught on a wildlife cam on the edge of the savanna. Really doesn't have anything to do with the savanna, the habitat I made, I don't think, but I just like the fact that they're there, and between them and the coyotes, we have sort of a good apex predator thing going on at this point in my neck of the woods, no pun intended. Some of the birds that like more open communities you can find scattered about. I've had woodcock painting in the savanna, although I think they really need a little bit bigger than 2 acres. I think really when you're talking about things like woodcock and as far as, doing their painting and their wildlife, they like pretty big openings. Bobwhite, who, we all know are in great trouble. They like savanna habitat. They like big habitat, like hundreds or thousands of acres. But, I occasionally get them going through now. And when we had that clear cut next door, we really saw an uptick in them. So that was nice. Turkey, they can take it in the forest as well, but we have seen turkey with young foraging the savanna, and then red-headed woodpeckers. As many of you know, they like more open habitats. Where I've girdled trees is the area that they seem to be drawn to. And I'll leave you with this picture that gives you a good idea of the extent of the savanna. This is looking from the front of the house towards the back of the savanna. This probably is about half the total area. It's about an acre, I think, that I got into that shot. But gives you an idea. That's probably a May picture. Things aren't too tall yet. Gives you an idea of the habitat. I feel very blessed to have, gotten to really be a part of the changes that resulted from the management I've done and really learn a great deal and be surprised and tickled. It's like bird migration. You see a new bird every other day during the peak of the season, and every week or two I'll go out there and see a plant in an unexpected place, or something acting in a way I didn't expect, or an animal keying in on a plant. It's just a wonderful way to I've gotten to experience that 2 acres out in the woods. So thank you very much, and I see Jill's click back on, and I'm glad to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was wonderful. What a great story.
You're welcome.
And a great way to use your 3 decades down there. That's really cool. Okay, the first hand up was, I believe, Michael Wilpers. You want to go ahead and unmute? And then Mark Imlay can go.
Sure. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm working with Pepco for the last 20 years on a power line stretch, reduced mowing, some recently stump treating and foliar treatment for calorie bear, which is really bad. So I have a few questions. Hopefully they're short, reasonably short answers. What percentage of the herbaceous flora do you think is attributable to the seed bank, and what percentage to seeds coming in by animals or wind? That's one. And
yeah,
another is how different would the results have been if you had relied entirely on mowing and non-native plant, remediation, and not had been able to do burn?
Yeah,
The most important.
that's a great question. The first one I really don't know. I'd be guessing if I dissected the list and really did some life history research, I could give you an answer. I'm sure it's a mix. Things like that clematis, I'm sure, were there before I got there. And some of the less mobile, the plants I think of as less mobile are certainly there. That Matelia isn't, that actually is mobile. I'd have to think on that one. So I can't help you on that one. On the second one, that's a fantastic question. And thank you. And I'll just say I've been involved a lot with work on power lines down here in Virginia with Dominion, and a lot of the work we've been doing. And I know fire isn't always a tool you can use. And so the question you're asking, I think, is a good one. How much can you recreate with mowing in the absence of fire? And I think a lot of it is light. Some of it certainly is soil disturbance. There, as you probably know, there's a subset of seeds that need their seed coat, broken up by fire. They're actually adapted to heat as a way to remove dormancy from the seeds, and some of them are actually smoke released as well, which I didn't know until a couple of years ago. But I think, in the absence of having fire, mowing is a great strategy, to get at a lot of these plants. And I've seen some power lines that make me weep in how beautiful they are with just the use of mowing. So that is certainly something that's really very cool. I have one last comment on that. Oh, and the other thing that fire does for you that mowing doesn't do quite as well is it removes the thatch. So you get bigger areas of mineral soil that give you a greater chance for some of your seeds to germinate. But so fire is pretty damn good at some of those things, but in the absence of that, mowing, of course, at least does the light part, and you might experiment with different deck heights to get at some of the more chewing up the soil and the lower stuff if you can sacrifice a few mowing blades. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Go ahead and unmute Mark, and you can ask your question.
20 years ago, my house has about a 1/4 acre. And 20 years ago, I stopped mowing. I got in trouble, of course, but I succeeded. And it took about 5 years to catch up with removing all the non-natives. And then about 15 species of native plants popped up. And since then, I've only planted about 5, but it's just pointing out, it's like what Chris has done. It's a success story. You could do it. 5 years is hard. And then each year now, I just spend a couple of days keeping up with it.
Nice. Well done.
Thank you, Mark. How about Lauren and then Doug Gill? I think you were waving your hand, right, Doug?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, yes, that was amazing, really inspiring. So I
Thank you.
don't know if I missed, one of the things like with the burning and so on, and you mentioned the thatch removal. In my property, I have about 3 acres. It used to be a cattle farm. So what I have is a lot of old pasture grass, which is so dense that nothing hardly gets through. So that's my challenge. And I'm wondering what was your property historically? Some of the success I think you might have had is the fact that it sounds like maybe it really wasn't ever developed. So the ground wasn't scraped clean and the cows weren't there for 40 years or whatever, those kinds of things impact your existing seed bank.
I totally agree, Lauren. It's a totally different situation than you had. So mine was in forest probably since tobacco farming left the Commonwealth 100+ years ago. So, it's probably been logged once or twice, but not planted. And of course you've got, it's planted, I assume it's planted in cool season grasses. Is it mostly fescue planted? Yeah. So you have a totally different situation than I do. And I have no right to tell anybody anything. I was blessed with having a very good starting situation, which you aren't. You have a world of challenges to get from point A to point B. So good luck with that. I think you have to do something to break up the fescue, and I am no expert in that, but there are lots of people that are working on that problem. So in the Northern Virginia Piedmont, I'm gonna blank out on the group, but there's a couple groups in the Northern Piedmont of Virginia that are doing a lot of work on that. I'm sure Jill can ask Rod to track those down, but they might have some role because they're working on that problem right now. And it's a problem a lot of people are working on. So good luck.
I mean, I have that, and I have invasives and all those other woodies and all. I have a couple different kind of habitats, but I think, as people consider this for their own home properties, if you have like a standard residential setting,
Yeah.
the probability of your soil was scraped away at some point or something, there's all kinds of things that happen that remove the seed bank. So it's tricky to try to just not mow or whatever.
Well, and that's why also planning is an alternative that needs to be used in many situations. I mean, I really did luck out in where I started.
Yeah.
So I don't mean that I didn't do anything special that anybody else could have done if they had as good a starting. My canvas for my painting was very clean. And
I think your magic is that you understood that.
Well, yeah.
Other people might not have realized.
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't know. I could have all turned out very badly, but I didn't know. I just thought, let's see. And I lucked out.
Good for you. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, Doug Gill.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Chris, that was a great talk. I agree with everything that you have found. Many of you have heard my talk of the restoration of grasslands on the Eastern Shore. We're dealing with 230 acres on sandy, acid, well-drained soils. But to answer some of the questions that came up in our experience, nearly all the sudden appearance of 260 species of plants and what had been pasture for 200 years and row crops for the most recent 50 years came out of the soil. So it turned out all that human impact of pasture and agricultural activity apparently did not really upset the seed bank. Sprang up. It was just amazing. So yeah, lots to share. I've given my talk to the Maryland Native Plant Society a couple times, so they've heard that. So a great talk. Really appreciate it. And what you found is very much exactly what we had found.
Thanks, Doug. Steve Longer.
You mentioned a lot the importance of buffalo and elk in disturbing the area, but buffalo and elk also deposit a lot of poop as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story of a running buffalo clover or Trifolium stoloniferarum. And if you are, and I'm boring you, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'll make it kind of quick. So they're legumes, but this thing does not produce nitrogen. It has no rhizobial associates. It got all its nitrogen and other nutrients from buffalo poop. Obviously, the buffalo also disturbed the soil, dispersed and scarified the seed, produced open habitat that was very conducive for the spread of this plant. Also populated itself through its runners, its stolon itself. The plant was actually declared extinct in the early 1940s, but rediscovered in West Virginia in about 1983, declared endangered in 1987, and now found in at least 5 states. Sometimes there's another report of a 6th state. The question I have for you is, have you considered actually adding manure to simulate the conditions of buffalo and elk?
I have not. And I thank you for sharing. I wasn't aware that stoloniferum didn't produce nitrogen through a nitrogen bacteria type interaction. The reason I wouldn't want to do that is because I'm trying to just, find out what's in the seed bank and what might be brought in by chance by animals. So if I add manure, it seems sort of like I'm cheating. But I should actually mention that a lot of the ungulates that roam through, the deer might drop plenty of manure from plenty of places and have probably brought in more than one of the plants through their manure, as the birds have through their manure of the seeds that they've of the fruits they've eaten. So, but thank you for that. I learned a little bit right there. I didn't know about that clover.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Steve. Okay, Bob Solom.
Yes, I wanted to thank Chris for his kind words. Joe and I are still very active in the Howard County Bird Club, and one of the things we are doing is encouraging gardeners and others to plant native plants, particularly in order to attract butterflies and other pollinators. Naturally, the emphasis on the Howard County Bird Club is with the birds, but we are also very much into natural history. I'm serving as webmaster for the club, and if you Google Howard County Bird Club, you'll be able to see all of the different activities that we are involved with. So we have, and naturally, Joe and I have your volume on Virginia native plants and use it because it is much more current than anything that is available for Maryland. So again, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I have a lot to thank you for. You and Joe were great. Really nurtured me when I was getting into my Newcomb's Wildflower Guide a long time ago.
Oh yes, we still have our copy. Okay, thank you much.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe we all know and remember exactly where we were when we got our first Newcomb and thought, wow, this is so cool.
It really was.
It was ingenious, really. I still use it. I think it's really fun. Okay, who else has a question? Do we need to go to the chat?
So Lisa Cooter was asking about the pre-colonial fire frequency and kind of what the cause of it was. Was it attributed to the activities of Native Americans, i.e. hunting, or were they more likely naturally occurring fires? And then she had a kind of a second part of, do regular burns lower pH, contributing to your savanna's basic soil?
Okay, so for first question, that's a tough question to answer because fire, of course, lightning fire, but also human set fire, and the frequency is a tough question too. So is undoubtedly a mixture of both fire, if you want to say natural, I think of Native Americans as sort of natural fire too. But if you want to say lightning ignition, I think has a percentage in places like Florida where they have a lot of lightning. There's a lot more that can be attributed to lightning in addition to Native Americans. So I don't know the answer to that question, and I think I won't even guess, because I think that would be I'm not an expert, and I'm not an expert honestly on soil pH. The basic soils, I will say the basic soils, it's pretty much in Virginia. You can tie the soils in the Piedmont, the sort of the acidity of the soils in the Piedmont, almost always directly to the rocks underneath. So in areas of granite, you'll get pHs that run in the 4 to 5 range. In areas of gabbro and hornblends and hornblende gneiss, that kind of thing, it'll be higher, and that's what it is, certainly in my area. So that's all I can tell you. I don't know what effect fire has on soil pH. That's an area also I have no expertise on that.
Somebody asked, when is your book coming out?
Which book is that?
Was that Carol Krachik? I didn't know. She didn't say. If it's the Virginia Flora, it's already out. So maybe she's thinking, when are you going to write a book on your oak savanna? I don't know.
The blog post was as far as I'll probably go with it.
Okay.
There's too much fun to be had to be writing this stuff down every time. I don't have any big literary plans right now.
Okay. Let's
So
see.
Laureen asks, do you have a problem with deer?
With deer, not as bad as I know most areas do that you guys. I'm Maryland born and lived there for the first 20 years of my life, and Maryland is, just a mess. I know. No, we have a lot of coyotes, and we have, a lot of people that wear orange in the fall, and between those two, they keep the numbers pretty reasonable. It's been a big year. Like almost every day I see deer this year, but I've gone years where you hardly see any. So not a problem with overpopulation of deer. I think Joe was asking about like gypsy moth and the new invasive bug I'm blanking out on right now. We don't have a lot of those problems quite yet. We've really been lucky.
Oh, I have a question. How did the drought affect things? Did you have a drought like we did,
Yeah.
like almost 2 months?
Yeah, like a 5-week gap of rain in the spring, and it doesn't seem to really had much effect. The blooms weren't quite what they are, and things might be a little shorter, but mostly in the savanna, at least, it's perennials and woodies that they'll drop their leaves or whatever, but they'll snap back pretty well. So not
Okay.
much. Yeah.
Branford Land Trust asks, did you have to get permits for the burning?
No, it's, again, I don't live in, Maryland that has millions of people on top of one another. So it's pretty casual out in the part of the county I live. And I call the county dispatch before I set a fire and say, if anybody calls about smoke, here's my address, and I'm doing a small controlled burn. And I don't even always do that if I know if the smoke's going to go straight up and not be too heavy. It's a small area. So.
And then another question from Branford Land Trust. If you got rid of the small woodies, are you leaving some small trees for regeneration?
No, I'm not. And the big trees are actually too dense at this point. I showed you a couple shots that will give you an idea that it's a pretty shady area now. So the idea is that, if I'm going to occasionally cut out a tree, but all that's going to happen is going to make it a little bit sunnier for a while, and then the other trees are just going to get bigger. So it's mostly a game of getting the light just right. And as far as regeneration, these are oaks that live hundreds of years. So I don't expect any mortality in the foreseeable future that would demand replanting. So no, I'm going to try to keep the woody growth down and let the herbs do their thing. I'm moving to a less frequent fire frequency because the woodies are somewhat under control.
Paula asks, did you have any help, I assume, with all of the various types of control that you were doing?
No, just sort of my introverted fun time. That's pretty much what it was. I had some help early with the burning, as I mentioned, because I didn't really know what I was doing. So I would learn, to burn into the wind and all kinds of little tricks that make that a lot safer. Yeah, and I'd recommend anybody who's thinking of doing this actually to really learn about fire and how it acts and become very comfortable with it before you don't have a lot of help. I've had a couple people who have helped me with some firewood, but when an oak comes down or I decide it's time to thin it a little.
Okay, that might be it. Last chance. Better speak up real quick. All right, if that's all, then thank you so much, Chris. That was really, really interesting. Loved it and did a great job. Yeah,
Thank you.
definite applause. I guess we'll look, maybe if we can have the link to your blog or.
Yeah, I put it in the talk, but Joe, if you just send me a little email tickler, I'll send you that link.
Perfect. Okay,
right.
I'll do that right after this so I don't forget.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and same thing, I got to get Doug Gill's stuff because he's I can't wait to hear it. So Doug, I did a lot of work on the Maryland Eastern Shore when I first got into botany, so I have to learn more about what you did. It'd be interesting.
All right. Thanks again, and thank you all for tuning in. It's great to have so many people and great questions. And come back next month for Rod Simpson's wonderful talk on the APACE. You can go to the website mdflora.org and register. And we'll see you next month. Have a good September. It's fall. I can't believe it. Cannot believe it's fall. Anyway, take care, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, Chris. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.